everyone, welcome. My name is Odile Harder. I'm a member of the Search and Discovery Initiatives Education Group. My fellow group members are Robin McElhenney, Allison Thornton, and Emily Singley. So we all organized this event, and I also wanted to thank Scott Wicks, who suggested the topic, which the motivating impetus for this panel was the decision by the Authors Guild to drop its suit against HathiTrust. So the decision that they decided not to challenge strongly affirms the use of mass digitization for purposes of facilitating fair uses such as creation of a full-text search database or access for the print disabled. So we're focusing on this idea of that it might be possible for libraries legally to engage in mass digitization projects of full-text databases, and kind of what does that mean? What might the implications be? It's not that clear, and Kyle's going to talk more about this.
I promise nothing.
Exactly how far that goes, but one of the possibilities that maybe is there, and if it isn't for in-copyright material, it's certainly there already for out-of-copyright public domain material, is to use text mining techniques to do something, maybe enhance discovery. So we wanted to have a panel presentation that covered a few different aspects of this idea. The first is that legal background, which will be addressed with no promises by Kyle Courtney, who doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. He is the copyright advisor for Harvard. It's apparently Harvard Library, but expands outward to the entire university, and known to most of us also as the person who's behind the Copyright First Responders program. So he'll be explaining that, the legal background of this decision, and also of full text access to and use of full text for mining purposes. And then John Unsworth has not been able to arrive yet, so he may come in as a sort of last minute addition at the end of the panel, but he, if he does come, he will be addressing the background, the HathiTrust specific background, the implications of the decision, and also how scholars are using HathiTrust to text mine. And then our second panelist now is Jean Bauer, who will be stepping back and addressing the larger context of just text mining. What is it useful for, to help us address the question of what can libraries do that would actually be of value to our researchers, not to immediately jump to the conclusion that text mining for discovery purposes is the way to go. And so Jean Bauer is currently the Associate Director at the Center for Digital Humanities at Princeton University. She was there for the start of the center in September, and before that she was the Digital Humanities Librarian at Brown University. She's a triple threat librarian, scholar, and programmer, and among her project credits are the Mapping Colonial America's Publishing Project and the Early American Foreign Service Database, which was the digital humanities part of her dissertation project. And then our final speaker will take us down into the details of a specific use case of text mining for discovery enhancement. And that's Jonathan Kennedy, who is a senior software engineer at the Center for Biomedical Informatics and Countway Library of Medicine. He focuses on the application of semantic technologies to information management issues. And his interests include linked data, semantic search, machine learning, natural language processing, cloud computing, and digital preservation. And he put those interests to use, specifically the natural language processing, as team lead for the ASHE project, Automatic Subject Heading Extraction project, which was a library lab project in 2012 that created a tool that was able to extract subjects from full text books and then map them to an existing subject ontology. So he's going to share with us some lessons learned from that project. So without further ado, or do we have is this John? So then I'll do a fuller introduction for John. So John Unsworth is the Vice Provost for Library and Technology Services and Chief Information Officer at Brandeis University. He's a longtime professor of English and began writing about and thinking about electronic publishing and humanities computing in the early 1990s. He's co-editor of the forthcoming second edition of the Blackwell Companion to the Digital Humanities, and he's also, which is relevant for us today, a member of the executive committee at HathiTrust. And so, as I mentioned earlier, he'll be talking to us about the Hathi-specific context for this legal decision and for scholars' current text mining practices with that large corpus of full text material. All right, without further ado, I will turn it over to Kyle.
So, if we get the screen to go on, that would be a good start to the day. There we go. So, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad the turnout is nice on such a sunny day. I myself considered that, if I was coming to this conference, I'll be over at Fung Auditorium, just kind of wandering into the square and continuing to drink tea and hang out. But I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the topics. The Authors Guild versus HathiTrust case was followed by the world, it seems like, very closely over the last few years, and the final stipulation in 2015 was of interest to a lot of us. And I'm going to review just very briefly about the case, but what it may mean, what it could mean, and also talk about any interference with that which we're currently seeing in the form of licensing, which would trample our fair use rights to text mine. But we're going to talk about that all in good time. So for those that don't know, just the briefest of backgrounds, we were part of this in that Google was coming to American libraries and scanning certain amounts of work, some in public domain, some in copyright. And they thought, well, let's donate this to a single giant digital repository, which will become the HathiTrust. So the scans went in there, and obviously they were sued over this, because it seemed to the Authors Guild and a number of other people in the United States that this was some sort of copyright infringement. And the issue specifically dealt with storing the scans for preservation, which is a Section 108 kind of question, which gives us, the libraries, the potential to store copies of things that may be endangered, worn out, damaged, etc. To enabling researchers to conduct text mining of the full text files, that's what we're going to be talking about today, but also, and playing a secondary role, and at least in the issues initially, but taking a major context in the decision itself, was facilitating formatting to meet the needs of the print disabled. The combination of 2 and 3 led to kind of how the decision turned out in the end. But during this time, suit and post-suit, and I got this from my friend Melissa Levine out at University of Michigan, they were still scanning and continuing to scan during this time. So we're talking about a lot of corpus in their collection, quite a number, greater than we have ever seen before. The first decision regarding this came out in October 2012 as a lower court decision by Judge Baer, and it had this sentence, which I think a lot of law librarians and lawyers and librarians were waiting for decades to hear, is that the idea that the court viewed something that gives transformative use and also establishes progress of promotion of science and the useful arts, and at the same time effectuates the ideals of the ADA, all wrapped into one. And this is kind of an amazing sentence, which I will continue to show you throughout the idea, is that, hey, this is a fair use. What they're doing seems to be legitimate within the bounds of copyright. And we're going to go over this briefly, but this is the sentence that I would argue that the Authors Guild did not like the most in this decision, and they quickly appealed. And so we had, how did they come to this conclusion in that lower court decision? Well, there was a lot of emphasis on transformative fair use, and I'm just going to review it very briefly because this is the way that text mining escapes the infringement that would normally be done if you're copying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of books inside copyright. Basically, it says you're doing something new with the material, the corpus, in this case, the books itself. You're doing something new that is different than the original intended purpose or the original intended use of that work. And this is not a new concept in that transformative fair use is something that's not been around. It's been around since about 1992. It was in a law review article that this idea of transformativeness as a fair use was proposed. It was adopted into the case law by the Supreme Court of the United States, and it's been followed up. And I just picked two cases because I think they jive particularly well with the conversation we're going to have today. One is the Two Live Crew case, and one is the Grateful Dead posters case, which is how they're known. But what we're doing is we're looking at the fair use provisions inside the Copyright Act. And these fair use provisions, this is the 4-part balancing test, which I hope many of us are familiar with. But the concept here is that we're reading even further into them, that because we're allowing technology, we're allowing ourselves to leverage technology to be able to use this test in ways that we had not foreseen when it went into effect in 1976. And I think the two areas specifically that the decisions focus on is the transformative use of fair factor 1 and the transformative use of factor 4, and those are what I'm going to focus on because I only have 15 minutes. So, everyone know who this is? Yes, Roy Orbison. Okay. So he wrote a song, Pretty Woman. Pretty Woman was a very popular hit, and like most song folks of his generation, he did not own the rights to it, really. He signed it over to a record company. And so Roy Orbison wrote this song, signed the publishing and distribution rights and every other right possibly there was over to a publishing group. Decades later, along comes Two Live Crew. Now, Two Live Crew, it's a great picture of them. They are no strangers to court. They have been involved in some of the most exciting First Amendment actions. This decision on copyright law kind of changed the face of what we perceive of as transformative fair use today. So they come along and they do a sample of Pretty Woman, modifying some of the lyrics, using some of the backbeats, etc. But they're doing it through the lens of where they grew up in North Miami. So Pretty Woman, as written by Roy Orbison, was about, I would imagine, a girl that lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, with brown eyes, who is the reflection of what he considers the ideal girl. Their version of it was very different. It was actually a streetwalker in North Miami who they were all familiar with and wrote a song. So the court looking at this said, well, what was the purpose of the original song? Well, it was told through Roy Orbison's eyes. Putting their lens on that tale, they made a transformative, and parody I might add, but they also mentioned transformative use of this work. They're taking it and putting it through their artistic lens and vision and telling the same story only through the urban North Miami region, which they grew up in and talked about. And one of the interesting parts of this decision is that the court, embracing transformative fair use for the first time, says that it has a new meaning, new message, or new purpose when they wrote this or sampled this new song. And that many artists have done this for hundreds of years, and that it gives the artist the right to breathe. And that's kind of an interesting statement. So we have this kind of music decision that was founded. Later, the concept of transformative use gets more developed in the Grateful Dead posters case. Now, this particular case dealt with Bill Graham. Bill Graham was a music promoter, and I have to say genius. He managed to save all the posters of the Grateful Dead and the Haight-Ashbury scene during that time period, scanned them all in, and you can buy digital copies of these and print copies of these and put them, frame them and have them at your house. And he captured all of that in one giant commercial, I might add, vision. Along comes DK Publishing, and they want to do something unique and different. They want to do a pictorial illustration of a pictorial history, of the Grateful Dead. So it's not a scholarly study. They want to use lots of images and texts and ticket stubs and concert posters and track lists and all sorts of stuff. And if you actually look at this book, it's a chronological timeline in which, on this date, this concert happened. And they have an interview with the person who was there, and they have a copy of the ticket stub, and they have a copy of the poster, and they have a picture from the concert. And it moves throughout, doing a scholarly study of a specific area of subculture music in America. And they asked Bill Graham for, hey, can we use 7 of your posters and put them in our book? And Bill Graham Archive said no. And in a shocking maneuver, in which I don't think I would have done, they put it in there anyway, which is amazing, a commercial publisher taking a risk like that. And obviously, Bill Graham sued. I mean, this was interesting. So the court looked at this in an interesting way, and they said, well, there's two different transformative purposes here. So there's the original purpose, which is the purpose of the poster. What's the purpose of a concert poster? I heard nothing, but I'm assuming you said sell tickets. Commercial. It's commercial based. So where is the concert happening? When is it happening? And where can I buy tickets? It's promotional in nature. The purpose that they saw in this book was a scholarly study in chronological history through combination of texts and images of this particular band. So the purpose of the poster inside the timeline was transformative. Additionally, they were not doing full res, high res scans of this. They were doing arguably small thumbnail versions of these posters. So they had an argument for a fair use that the court read into. The purpose is different. It gives a new meaning. It is scholarly in nature, and you're using as much as necessary to serve that purpose. A small thumbnail version of it on a page full of many other images, texts, etc., putting it in perspective. So we have these initial decisions, and there's a number of other transformative decisions, but I think these kind of speak the best to how we then apply this to the HathiTrust scenario. But we're not taking it in visual images or pictures or songs. We're applying it to text mining, or what sometimes is referred to as non-consumptive research. We're using the same four factors, but we're examining the purpose of our text mining use. And I think that that's an important part of the whole program. Now, the last one I said, the transformative market as well. So the fourth factor is, if I sell these to someone, well, then I've created a market for this. They should be able to buy this. Bill Graham did not have a market for other publishers to use thumbnail versions in their books at the time period. Additionally, the court kind of said you can't foresee a transformative market because it is a new and different use which you can't create a licensing scheme or marketing scheme for. So we had some interesting roles between the text mining and the non-consumptive research and those, I guess, what I'd argue, musical and pictorial cases. And so this is how we get this sentence, that this is a transformative fair use. It's encompassed in a way, the text mining is encompassed in a way that promotes the progress of science and the useful arts, aligns specifically with what copyright's intended to do, on top of the fact that it helps aid compliance with the ADA. So what happened after that sentence is, I'm going to leave this as a footnote, but in June 2014, the Second Circuit said, yes, we agree with most of this. Full text searching is good, especially when you deal with print-disabled readers under U.S. law. January 2015, I took this from a library journal. They said, the Authors Guild declared victory and ended the litigation, which they did. They were like, we meant to stop orphan works, and that's what we stopped, although that had been moot and long before that. But it was actually a stipulation that ended the case by agreement of both parties, and HathiTrust agreed to be observed for a 5-year period, I guess, and if they changed their wily ways, they would have to inform Authors Guild. So it effectively ended with this quote and this decision. So what does this mean for libraries? And I would agree, affirm the use of mass digitization for purposes that are facilitating fair uses. Now, I believe that we can create full text search databases across for the print-disabled and maybe for other scholarly uses that we haven't seen. The Second Circuit also endorsed this functional transformation, and we're getting deep into the weeds there, but finding that a use is transformative if the work is significantly different purpose. And again, so what are we talking about with our purposes here? So I go into a giant library. Let's say I want to do a specific text mining search here. The project, pre-technology. How would I search for all mentions of the word ghost in 19th century literature and compare it against the use of the word spirit? Well, I would have to go into that library and find every book and read all of them and look for that term. Now, it doesn't have to be a book on ghosts. It doesn't have to be Dickens. It could be anything. Anything that has the word. Well, how am I going to possibly be able to do that? Well, let's look at the purpose. The purpose, the non-consumptive research, the text mining, I'm using it for a different purpose. The purpose of the book itself, like the posters, the purpose of the book itself is for whatever topic that book is on. You read that book to gain insight into the topic that it's written about. However, my search for ghost versus spirit is an entirely different search. I don't care what necessarily is in the book or what the book is about. I'm looking at word usage. So that is a different purpose. It is a transformative purpose. And text mining allows that to happen in a way that leverages the technology, that stays within the bounds of fair use. Now, still, not everyone necessarily agrees with that, but I remember in 2013, they already decided to allow a sandbox to exist for people to start mining this stuff. And that was before the stipulation, before the case party agreed, and I was very excited about that, in that people were starting to do that very thing that I was talking about. It's not just the academics either. Text mining has been spotted here and there and everywhere. I know that Ernst & Young has been using text mining for forensic investigations to detect patterns, high-risk terms. Two of my colleagues that were formerly over at the law school were looking at how the news of prestige press articles was either having certain tones that they were using, certain key words for denying climate change. That was fascinating. And there was a professor that was searching 23,000 articles to pick out proteins that could relieve a mouse model of multiple sclerosis. And the only way that you could possibly do that and advance the science and advance actually fighting that disease is through this text mining. So we have practical uses already happening in also academic uses. And I'd like to think that that's possible, but immediately, of course, there's trouble, right? So we have this decision. We have fair use. It exists here in the United States. Versions of it called fair dealing exist in the UK and other common law countries. But a lot of people think, all right, well, how would you as an Authors Guild or Authors Guild related party start to prevent people from doing what I would perceive of as their fair use? And licensing seems to be the new mode of preventing us from doing this type of things. And a few things about this. So a professor over at UC Santa Cruz sought copyright permission. This was amazing. So this is pre-text mining. It was 3 years to get the rights to download 3 million articles for which he extracts DNA data to annotate an online map of the human genome. Permission takes a long time. And that's within the bounds, and you can seek permission. Fair use, if it's within our legal warehouse to text mine, is more instantaneous. But if they put a license in your way, then potentially you may not be able to text mine in the capacity in which you were. And I always say, where there's trouble, there's librarians. In 2013, librarians, research technology communities actually walked out on negotiations with the European community because no one was discussing at the time period about text mining as an actual right. Instead, they were focusing completely on, hey, let's license this. This is another area where we can license materials. And our friends in Copyright Clearance Center were right on board with this almost immediately. The Copyright Clearance Center is located nearby in Danvers, Massachusetts. They funded much of the litigation against libraries over the last 5 years, including the GSU e-reserves decision. And they were like, oh, absolutely, we would act as an intermediary, collecting publishers' terms and content and storing on the website for researchers. So why would we need someone in the way? So we have these databases full of books and journals and materials that we have access to. In fact, libraries pay lots and lots of money for access to these journals and these databases and whatever it is. Why should we have to then pay again in order to text mine them? But that's what they want us to do, very much so. JSTOR was one of the early ones, actually, that was on the side of good, that said, look, you can write us if you want document level data, including word frequency, citations, key terms, n-grams. For those who are not familiar, Google Books has an n-gram. This is my favorite n-gram search of all time. The use of Albert Einstein, Sherlock Holmes, and Frankenstein over the years. But this is the kind of stuff that you could do automatically on Google right now. But the scientific community, the academic community, a number of other communities want to be able to do more. And Elsevier just released their text data mining license last year. And it's been shopped around in many universities. I've had conversations. For those of you that came to the medical school summit a few weeks ago, I talked to Elsevier about their problems with text mining there, but I'll run down frequently for you the reasons. They are saying that we don't get to search the corpus in which we pay for. Say it's Science Direct. We have to go and sign up for something entirely separate and pay for something entirely separate in order to text mine. Our argument is this is a fair use. The right to read is the right to mine. That is a call to arms that's been used in the UK a number of times. But if we can read it, we should be able to mine it. And that's the fact. Elsevier's license interferes with speed. So they have us going at an average of 10,000 articles per week. Now, to many text miners, that is incredibly slow. I'm not a full text miner, but if you did about an article every 60 seconds, that would be about 10,000 a week. And if you wanted to search, say, Science Direct, their platform, which is about 11 million articles, it'll take you 21 years at that rate. So that's not helpful. Access, again, access. So we have access to all these journals, these articles already. They're going to make us go through a special program. Now, Elsevier is not the only one doing this type of licensing, but again, it's impacting what I have established is our fair use to text mine. We are in this country in a way that I would like to say to the publishers, publish and then step out of the way. Let us be able to do this. Accessing this stuff, which we already pay for, we already have access to, should be simple. They also require you to scrape something for an API, and I'm sure we'll hear more about the way to text mine in the future, but basically they prohibit robots, crawlers, spiders, et cetera, from going over their network. They can only use their API, and I know a lot of text miners that don't want to do it that way. They think API actually inhibits their ability to text mine. And some people think they're anti-responsible science. In order for a good scientist to get reproducibility of their work, they usually dump the data out for other scientists to come along. Responsible scientists do this. You make the corpus available. That's not going to happen. They limit you to about 200 characters per snippet if you want to share some of which you text mined with the world. And lastly, and I argue this is the one that upsets me the most, is that it's anti-repository and library, in that you cannot put your output, if you're a text miner, in your university repository according to the license. Yes, this is a shocker to a lot of folks. And, fortunately, I have the ability to have a conversation with them about this. These are some of the areas that I think that they are directly impacting in a very real way what I would say is fundamentally our right to text mine, which has been established under United States law, and now with this stipulation, I think it's a closed book. Transformative fair use is very much here to stay. It's gained traction in the courts. Text mining is only going to get easier and better. What we need to be concerned about now is the contracts and the licenses that may interfere with our newly gained rights. So that's actually all I have time. So I believe I'm turning it back over to John. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your questions after.
Great. You ready?
You have a presentation?
I do, yes. All right, so this is you.
Hi, folks. Sorry I was late. If you've ever looked at the Harvard campus map on a mobile device, you'll know why I was late. And I need to correct one thing in that kind introduction. I'm on the executive board for the HathiTrust Research Center, not for the HathiTrust itself. They're actually two separate organizations. And the HathiTrust adopted the Research Center officially about a year ago. And what that means is that they'll funnel some of the membership income to the Research Center. But the Research Center has a separate steering committee or executive management team, and we actually use a separate copy of the data. So digital humanities, that's my research area, and that's one of the areas where we find a lot of people who are interested in text mining these days. Certainly not the only one. The HathiTrust had a user community, the HathiTrust Research Center had a user community meeting out in Ann Arbor earlier this spring, and one of the keynotes was from an economist from the University of Toronto who was looking at the diffusion of innovation around patents. So when was something patented and when does it start to be talked about a lot in the literature that you can find? That's an interesting time lag. So The applications for this are many. Digital humanities happens to be the one that I'm familiar with. That's an Ngram timeline for you, showing that was a term that just didn't get used before, well, really about 2004, which was when the first companion to digital humanities came out. These numbers are always out of date. These are slightly less out of date than the earlier numbers we saw, but they're close. So 13 million total volumes, 6 million titles, 4 billion pages. That's the number that I focus on, really. How many pages are we talking about? About 38% of the total is in the public domain, and that includes the orphan works reclassified by the HathiTrust as part of their project to, with due diligence, see if they could uncover evidence of works being recopyrighted in the period in U.S. copyright law when copyright had to be renewed. Still, let's say 60-40, optimistically, 60% of this stuff is in copyright. The HathiTrust motto is "There's an elephant in the library." The elephant is in the library, and he's really working now. That one looks like he's looking for bubble gum. That was part of a public relations campaign at, I think, the Edinburgh Public Library to remind people to remember to return their books. These are, I'm using slides from other people. I want to credit them. Brett Bobley has been supporting data mining in the humanities through the Digging into Data program in the National Endowment for the Humanities out of its Office of Digital Humanities for several years now. He observes that humanities scholars study people and the stuff that they make, books, music, art, newspapers. These things are studied from a wide range of disciplinary perspectives and from interdisciplinary perspectives. And these things, as they gradually get digitized, changing from analog to digital. We now have digital cultural heritage materials in books and music and art and newspapers, all. And because we're retrospectively digitizing the cultural record at an industrial scale now, this data is getting very large. And when you add to it the born digital stuff that we're producing in greater amounts every year, it's getting larger and larger at a very fast rate. And I think one of the things that I would observe is that in any discipline, the moment when you turn to computational methods happens when the preponderance of the primary data for that field becomes available in digital form. And this is at different points for different disciplines. So for astronomy, for example, I would say the turning point was probably the Sloan Sky Survey. And when you had lots and lots of digital astronomy data, then people start to think about framing different kinds of questions, which you wouldn't do if you didn't have that data in digital form and if you couldn't apply computational methods. I should also say that that doesn't mean that everything goes computational. People still use other methods for other kinds of investigations, but the point at which it becomes useful to think about computational methods is when most of your primary data is digital. And I would argue for the text-based humanities, that's happened now. We're at that turning point. The Digging into Data program, which I mentioned, is one of many programs out of the NEH, but it's unusual in partnering. Brett Bobley's Office of Digital Humanities has done a lot to partner internally with other US agencies and also internationally. And in fact, they have what's called a transatlantic platform where Brett is really building out partnerships with funding agencies not only in Europe, but in South America, Brazil in particular. And the programs that come out of those joint funding efforts, I think, will emphasize international collaboration, obviously. So for those of you who already collaborate with colleagues in Europe or in South America, other parts of the world, the UK, I think this is a good thing to keep an eye on because I think there will be interesting opportunities arising. These are some of Stephen Downey's slides. Stephen is on the executive management team for the Research Center also. He's one of the principals from Illinois. And I started working, the reason I'm on it is because I started working on this when I was at Illinois. I started actually in 2008 with John Wilkin, who's now the university librarian at Illinois, was then running the digital library program at Michigan. We started to work on a research center because even aside from the issues raised by the court case, it's an expensive proposition to maintain this vast digital archive, and you need to show value, basically. And the way we show value in research libraries is research. So demonstrating that this very large corpus could be used for something other than searching and browsing was critical, first and foremost, to the institutions that are funding the infrastructure, but also, as it turns out, to the court. There are a lot of members in the HathiTrust. This started as a core group of partners who had contributed to the Google Books project. But it's expanded beyond that now. You can become a member whether or not you participated in that program. As a member, you dump your catalog records, you get certain kinds of access in digital form to the things that you own in physical form, and that group is going to keep on growing. It's mostly US now, but it will become, I think, increasingly international. The mission of the HathiTrust itself, to contribute to the common good by collecting, organizing, preserving, communicating, and sharing the record of human knowledge. This is a popular diagram of theirs. It's really interesting when you have assembled sort of the contents of the ideal research library to see what that consists of in terms of its disciplines. This is the view that we have here. In terms of its language distribution, a little less than 50% is in English. 50% is in languages other than English. I think it's interesting that German is the second most common language and that Chinese is way down there. I expect that might change in the future. And dealing with copyright has been an issue since the HathiTrust was set up in the first place. And the HathiTrust itself tries to determine the copyright status of the works that it has represented in its collection using bibliographic metadata and using both automatic and manual rights determinations. And on all works at the time that they're ingested into the HathiTrust collection itself, they look at things that are public domain worldwide. That would be US works published before 1923 and some other categories. And they look at public domain in the United States. So works published elsewhere outside the United States before 1923 would still be considered in the public domain in the US. And this is what that rights determination actually looks like. And I use this slide because it's useful to demonstrate the complexity. It's not a binary, yes, it's in copyright, no, it's not. It's a very complicated picture with, on this slide, 19 different categories. So there's 19 states that a work could be in with respect to copyright or licensing. You see a whole category of Creative Commons licenses there. And the rights determinations are also given reasons. So when somebody looks and say, how did you decide that it was public domain in the US? This kind of code would be attached to that record as well and would indicate which of the many different ways something's copyright status might have been determined. And then there are permissible uses according to where the user comes from and also the work itself. So you can search bibliographic data pretty much for everything worldwide. You can view some things worldwide, public domain stuff. You can view public domain in the US of non-US works when accessed from the United States, but not from outside the United States. Works that are in copyright or of undetermined status, you cannot view, except in cases that are in the ADA category. And works in copyright or of undetermined status tend to be treated conservatively. The Research Center, as I mentioned, a separate entity, is meant to provide computational access to the whole corpus, including the copyrighted material. It's a collaborative effort between Illinois and Indiana, and these are the people on the Executive Management Committee. And I think one of the most important things that the HathiTrust Research Center has done actually is to push through the MOUs and the SLAs and the agreements between Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Google to permit this computational access and to actually take that risk on board. They're willing to do it because of the recent decisions, but I wouldn't say that those decisions that's not the end of the story. That's case law, and case law can change with other cases. So right now it looks good for transformative use. It looks good for research use of this material. But I feel a real sense of urgency that we need to get out there and demonstrate the research value of this before the next case comes along. So the judge has opened a window. We need to make sure we get through that window while it's still open. We're trying to provide persistent and sustainable infrastructure to enable this work, and we're trying to enable scholars to really fully use the content of the HathiTrust while preventing real abuse or misuse of materials. And this is a definition of the term non-consumptive research, which was brought up earlier. And that term actually originates with lawyers. Sounds like a lawyer term, doesn't it? Non-consumptive research. It comes out of the original settlement agreement, which was mooted by Judge Denny Chin between the Authors Guild and the HathiTrust. And non-consumptive research is not precisely defined there. The most strict reading of it would be you can read it, but you can't understand it. Understanding it is consuming it. So you can look at it, but don't understand it. We're not trying to satisfy that standard. We are trying to satisfy a standard that's on the other end of the spectrum, where we say you can do all kinds of things with it, you can understand it, you can interrogate it, you can find things out about it, but you can't take the work itself away, and you can't republish the work. Because I think that's really where you would get into trouble. So we're trying to disallow collusion between users. We're trying to disallow the gradual accumulation of material over time, differentiating human researchers from proxies, and so on. Our overall solution to this problem is to bring the computation to the data rather than taking the data away. And up to now, most of what people have done in computational text mining is to build test beds or build collections of some sort and then apply their tools to those collections. When you behave that way, other people don't necessarily have access to your test bed. Other people, if you got your material from a third party and you improve the data, the improvement doesn't go back to the source. The person who gave you the material can't necessarily see what you're doing with it and may never find out what you did with it. So bringing the computation to the data changes all of those dynamics in useful ways. I think it will create a center of gravity where we're likely to see code stored and exposed and exchanged between text miners. I think we'll see work sets exchanged so that somebody who's already assembled a set of stuff that's like what you want to work on has saved you some time. You don't have to do that yourself. I think it's an environment where improvements to the text can be shared across different projects and even shared back to the source. There are a lot of benefits, I think, to bringing the computation to the data. We currently do this in a few different ways. We have a portal that's available to the public and includes Bookworm, which is Ben Schmidt from Northeastern in the history department wrote a very interesting, sort of more sophisticated version of the Google Ngram engine with faceting, among other things. So you can really do much more fine-grained control of the set across which you're looking for n-grams, and that's available in the portal. You can do what we call secure data capsule access. So this would be access to the full collection. The architecture of the secure data capsule is essentially, it has two states that it can be in. It can be in a state where you can connect to the machine and it connects to the network and you can add software and twiddle bits and so on. Then it has a second state when it's connected to the data, and when it's connected to the data, it can't talk to anything else. So no inbound, outbound network connections while it's talking to the data. When it disconnects from the data, it should have only derived factual statistical data on it, and then that should be stuff that you could take off and publish or do whatever you want with. And then feature extraction services. So we have already begun to extract features, page-level features. So how many words, how many nouns, how many proper nouns, how many adjectives, that kind of thing. And publish those data sets. In fact, a few weeks back, we released the first of these extracted feature sets, which are page-level features from 4.8 million volumes of public domain text. It's over a terabyte so you have to get it with rsync because it's too big to FTP, but it's publicly available, and you can go and download that and play with it to your heart's content. It has bibliographic data. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I just want you to know that there is a diagram with boxes. So you should feel secure. And there are hands on keyboards. I do recommend the Bookworm. I'm going to leave that URL up there for a minute so that you can jot that down, bookworm.htrc.illinois.edu. It's a lot of fun to play with. And it works on an extracted feature set like what I was just talking about. The Bookworm technical team are these wonderful people at Illinois and Indiana and some other places, Baylor, Northeastern. They've done a lot of work. This was the tweet announcing that the page level features from 4.8 million volumes are now available, and I'll leave that URL up there also for a minute if you want to get it, portal.htrc.illinois.edu/features. That was released in March. When you get to that URL, it's going to tell you how to rsync it. And this is sort of the receding view of the book, and it's interesting. The right to read is the right to mine. This is how it looks when we read a book. This is how it looks when we read across a whole book. This is how it looks when we read across many books. This is how it looks when we read across millions of books. So you're clearly not reading anymore at this point. Something might be reading for you, but this level, we're certainly not attending to individual books. And these are just a couple of fun examples from the Bookworm. Let's leave this one up. This is the blue line at the bottom is for love in law texts. The orange line is for love in philosophy, psychology, and religion. So an image is worth 1,000 words. And this little green line is love in bibliography, library science, and general information. So there's lots of interesting things that you can puzzle yourself with in the Bookworm. We are actively recruiting partners with research projects. We want to work together with those partners in building budgets for these projects. We will be giving preferential terms to HathiTrust member institutions, researchers from those institutions, but we're happy to work with anybody. And I guess the last thing that I'll mention is that I've also begun to have some conversations with publishers. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity for us here with publishers. You mentioned Elsevier, but I've been talking to people like ProQuest, and these are all publishers who publish primarily into an academic research market. And my impression of their business is that over the last maybe 10 years, they've been gradually shifting their notion of what their business is from being about content to being about platforms and services and tools. And as they make that shift, they're beginning to realize that the usefulness of the research platforms that they offer is limited by the extent of the material to which those tools can be applied. They are, ironically, bound by their own copyright. And publishers will never license their way out of this problem. No, if they take the licensing, they wouldn't even begin to go down the licensing road to solve that problem. So what we have, by virtue of the fact that a couple of state universities with sovereign immunity have decided to adopt a huge amount of risk, is we have a risk pool there that no one else is going to create and that can be leveraged, frankly. So the general pitch to publishers like ProQuest is give us your proprietary data, we'll put it in our secure environment, license your platform and your tools to whoever you want to license them to, and they will be able to use your stuff alongside the 4 billion pages of everything. And that will make your stuff more useful. And furthermore, anybody else can have the same deal with their proprietary data. It's in our interest to get as much of it in the big pile as possible. And frankly, if they want to compete on the basis of the utility of their platforms and services, I think that's in our interest too. And they will be able to do better than we will in many cases as academic software developers. So I don't have a problem with that. But I think another tipping point here is that we are potentially looking at the change of the balance of power around copyrighted and licensed material on account of the willingness of some universities to adopt strategic risk. And I think universities in general should be thinking about strategic risk acquisition. What are the risks that we should take, and how can we line them up so that when they go to court, we either win or don't lose. And not losing is just as good as winning in many cases. So if you don't have a strategic risk acquisition officer, you should go out and get one now. Thanks.
Oh, it's PDF. Great.
No, actually, I wanted something else. But. Okay. It doesn't. There we go.
Oh, there it is.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you to Deal and Emily, everyone who invited me. It's fantastic. It's terrifying to follow John Unsworth, but we'll see what we can do. So I'm Jean Bauer. I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Digital Humanities at Princeton. We are a almost 9-month-old Digital Humanities Center at Princeton. I've been at Princeton for almost 9 months. And before that, I was at Brown, so it's wonderful to be back up in New England. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to actually take a step back from the previous 2 talks and talk a little bit about why one might text mine. And with the not unlimited resources, even of a Harvard or a Princeton, you want to think strategically about investing in tools and in access that would allow you to text mine. My own research isn't specifically in text mining, but I have gotten extremely interested in search, discovery, and the roles that libraries play and the ways that information has been characterized. So basically, we'll be able to sum up my talk entirely in the following. So this is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. So I did use the meme generator to create this, but this is actually a quote from Roald Dahl put in the mouth of Willy Wonka as the glass elevator slams back into his factory. But really, 2 holes are better than 1, and any mouse will tell you that. If you have a huge amount of information, whether it's a library, whether it is an archive, whatever it is, you want more than one way in. And you want more than one way out. Because if you only have one way in and you only have one way out, you are limiting yourself to all of the various other things that can happen. Now, this isn't to say that there should be all ways in and all ways out, because that's not going to be very helpful either, right? What you want is to have people make choices, and you want them to think critically and to teach them through user interface, through education, through the way that you've developed your system on what choice they're going to make. So this is another quote from Sid Meier. A good game is a series of interesting choices. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that sounds like research, right? Research should be a series of interesting choices. And I am a giant geek, so maybe that's just my opinion. But honestly, there is nothing more immersive than really all of a sudden finding the rabbit hole of tracing the sources, tracing whatever it is you're looking for. If I am on the search for a early American consul, which is part of my dissertation, and I finally hit on a vein of information that will actually get me to who the heck this person was and what he was doing in Brazil, I'm gonna look up and it's gonna be like 3 hours later. Right? This is fun, but it has to be interesting. I have to know where I'm going. And I don't just want some giant open field where I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to get in. I don't know how to get out. I want forking paths, branching paths. I want to be able to move through the space through a set of curated but comparatively open choices. And so there is a fantastic article. It just came out about a month ago, and honestly, if you take nothing else away from this talk, it is go read this article. called Feminism in the Future of Library Discovery by Bess Sadler and Chris Borg. Chris is now just up the road at MIT. Bess is at Stanford University. Bess is one of the co-founders of Blacklight, the open source library platform. It's a fantastic article, and what it talks about in really thought-provoking ways is the ways in which library catalogs and really any ontology will reflect the ideas and ideals of the dominant power structures that created them, right? And so how do we think about creating catalogs? How do we think about creating systems and library discovery tools that will allow us basically that other mouse hole, right? Or a couple more mouse holes. How do we find different ways in? How do we allow for alternative ways of searching? How do we think through different ways of cataloging? How do we think through different ways of thinking? And this is really important, right? Because as we pretty much, I think everyone would agree at this point, all data is theory-laden. Well, the truth is all metadata is theory-laden too. And so when you come up with a system to classify everything, that's going to be pretty theory-laden as well. And, we can make fun of or cringe in horror from some of the older cataloging systems, but we don't know in 50 years what people are going to cringe about now, or people in our society, in our communities, in our research environments, among our students who are already cringing at things but don't feel like they can tell us. They may not have the voice to tell us for some time now. So how do we pay attention to this? And it doesn't mean no systems, no theories, no tools. It just means be critical. Think about what you're doing and make sure that there's another way in. And one of the things that is a line in the article that I wanted to pull out specifically, because I think it relates directly to today, is this the idea they have that, until we and our users, not just the librarians, but the users of those libraries, can data mine and index scholarly journal content, or really any content, but the big, scary, large prices get attached to the scholarly journal content ourselves, we're going to rely on commercial publishers to define the significance and relevance for us. So we're not even making our own necessarily bad choices. We're letting other people sell us their choices, depending on how good or how bad they might be. And this is where text mining, I think, is really important for libraries. And when you're thinking about what tools you want to build, the ways that you want to interact with this, even with, with limited funds, the idea of what tools, what access, what materials, where can you push on the system to help give researchers that stereoscopic vision, right? So if you have something and it's already working, you can always enhance it, and that's great. But what might give someone a different cut in? Bookworm is fantastic for this, right? So what can you do to give someone a visual cut at the data? When can you let someone search by, say, place of publication, which, by the way, you can't do in a library catalog. I built an entire digital humanities project called Mapping Publication of Letters, where first thing I had to do was to normalize place of publication for rare book cataloging, then hit the GeoNames API, and then I could build the map, right? For someone who comes out of a tradition of book history, where in fact the content of the book is really important, but the physical object of the book, the record of what it is you've got, is also really important too. And so much of that information is actually bound into the catalog, but not in a way that's very easy to get at. Or at least it wasn't at Brown when I was doing this project and was working across two different, of course there are only so many libraries at Brown, so when I complain about working across two of them, you can all laugh at me. But working across, the John Carter Brown Library and the John Hay Library was already a major sort of effort in diplomacy. They stared at each other across the quad. But doing that, but what is that different way in? And now there is a map that shows the location of all the books published in the New World before 1800 held on the Brown campus, and you can navigate it spatially. And then you can click and actually go back into the catalog. So this is all really great, and this is all really important, and I really think that Sadler and Borg have hit on something very important about the need to do this for ourselves. But the truth is, in honor of Hathi, when we data mine, we index the scholarly content, it still doesn't get us away from other people's choices, right? It's really elephants all the way down. Unless you're going to build your own statistical text mining data algorithm, you are still going to be relying on decisions that other people made. So for example, if you're using topic modeling, there's a particular set of decisions that have been made about what counts as statistically relevant, what counts as a topic, what counts as clustering. And you know what? That's fine. That's why you have multiple holes, as any mouse will tell you. It's why you want to move through it. You're not going to cancel them out by using multiple methods, but you might be able to triangulate towards something that's closer to what you are really interested in, and it gives you a different cut, and it will open new avenues of research that you didn't have before. One that I am actually very interested in, I have to say, even more than topic modeling or term frequency, is actually named entity extraction. And this is one, of course, I want the one that's really, really hard. It's not as hard as sentiment analysis, but it is really, really hard. Figuring out what constitutes a proper noun, a person's name, an organizational name, a place name. And this may have to come from my dissertation research, where I was chasing down obscure American consuls in the middle of who knows where, who had dropped off the record. But there is often, whenever you start to deal with things at scale, it's easy to want to look for the common features, the things that span across the books. And it's harder to get a sense of what's unique or strange or weird, except for when, of course, your search is Bork. Then it's really easy. But to get a systematic idea of what are the less frequent things that happen to be buried somewhere. So where is the name of the person who isn't mentioned enough to show up as a subject, right, of this book? Or the place that there's so few pieces of information about that nobody ever even thought to categorize it under that. But to look for that across books and to get a sense of a book by looking not just at the things that were qualified enough to go into the index, but what are the things that might have gotten missed? And that, I think, is something that's really powerful and really interesting. So that would be one of the text mining tools that, as a researcher, I think would be really incredible, and the chance to then compare the results of those named entity extraction searches across books, across subject categories, and all of that. So that's where I am going to end, and I know it's very easy to stand, particularly to stand in someone else's library and say, well, what tools should you build? All of them, all the tools, build everyone. Let me know when you're done. But when you are thinking about how you're going to do this, and when we are looking at potentially transitioning to BibFrame, when we are thinking about these larger changes that are coming in different organizations, I would really stress for your researchers and for yourselves to really think about as part of that decision matrix, really what gives you that other slice. And I think text mining has the capacity to do that. And I think that it's going to get easier over time.
Just move this up here. Sorry, I had to bring my own technology. Hi, my name's Jonathan Kennedy. I'm happy to see some familiar faces, and more happy to see some not so familiar faces, as I've given this talk a couple of times already. I'm a software engineer at the Department for Biomedical Informatics at the Med School and the Countway Library of Medicine. And I primarily focus on development of semantic technologies. So text mining, semantic search are two big things that I've been working on. I want to thank Kyle, John, and Jean for providing such great context and motivation for text mining, because I'm really going to dive into the weeds and talk pretty specifically about a specific project and what we did. So ASHE is squarely in the automatic subject indexing space in library sciences and in topic modeling overall in text mining. So if you're not already familiar and if you want to learn more, start with those keywords. In short, ASHE takes digital text, so scanned books, journals, whatever, and uses automated methods to extract the main topics of that work, and with the purpose being of indexing materials for improved discovery. So ASHE is a natural language processing project. It's based on natural language processing comes from computational linguistics. So computational linguistics is what you might get if you threw a bunch of linguists in the room, a bunch of computer scientists in the same room, and threw a kegger. It's kind of the love child of the two. It's the academic side where you are more interested in discovering new things about language using computational methods and then developing models for language, whereas NLP is the applied side. So we're actually doing engineering and solving more real-world problems with that knowledge. It makes sense to think of natural language processing as layers that build on top of each other. So you start with some very low-level tools to allow you to parse the grammar and syntax of a language, and from there you start building on greater levels of semantic knowledge. So, what are the named entities? What are the sentiments being expressed, et cetera? At the very top, you have something like Siri or IBM Watson that is actually an engaging, interactive system. You might say artificial intelligence. Most text mining projects, though, actually fall more towards the middle than the top, because you're really usually trying to answer a very specific question, extract very detailed statements or assertions from a body of text, from a corpus, rather than building these high-level cognitive systems, which are still really rare. NLP is used in so many things right now. Every time you use Google, you're using a system that has linguistic knowledge more increasingly baked into it. If you do a search right now for Samuel Clemens, you'll actually get a bio of Mark Twain, because it has more semantic understanding of both what you're querying and what the different documents that it has indexed are actually making statements about. The question answering system like IBM's Jeopardy-winning Watson is a great example of where this field is going. NLP is also used for translating languages, summarizing content, building knowledge bases of factual statements, and text mining, which is a very broad term for extracting information from text. I would say it's still an emerging field, though. A search yesterday across Indeed for job postings mentioning natural language processing skills pulled up less than 2,000 jobs. This is amongst hundreds of thousands of jobs for general software engineering. And most of those jobs actually ask for, or a large portion of the jobs that I sampled actually ask for a PhD. But you don't need a PhD. The industry is still catching up, because this really came from academics. But the tools are there, the models are there for people to run with and build and solve real-world problems. Personally, I fall in between the academic and practical software engineering side, so it's very easy for me to step into this area, but I think any capable software engineer could use the tools that are available. So ASHE, like all great collaborations, started over a beer. Peter Rolla, Countway's then head of technical services, was lamenting a large stack of papers on his desk that he had to get back to. It was a few hundred pages deep, and these were the scanned front matter that was then printed out for hundreds of books that had been sent to the Harvard depository because of lack of space. You might be familiar with the Harvard depository. It is an expansive, climate-controlled, robot-driven warehouse that stores and preserves important Harvard physical assets. Countway alone has over 100,000 titles at the depository, and half of these, though, don't have mesh headings, which are the subject headings for medicine that is most important to our community. So while the depository has a very streamlined process for retrieving items, retrieving individual titles for reprocessing is still slow and costly. So this caused me to wonder if I could use, since I was already working on biomedical concept extraction, if I could use this work and apply it to library materials for the goal of improving, to create automatic subject indexing and improve discovery. So the goal here was not to replicate what a cataloger could do. The idea was just to build something that was good enough so that it could run through the backlog, make items that were not visible in the catalog or not sufficiently visible in the catalog more visible and more findable for users. And then staff would incrementally work through their backlog and get around to correcting or perfecting the records. But first, do we still need subject headings? And I think it's a reasonable question, though maybe sound a little sink-or-sinked, to ask this question in a world of keyword searching and digital text. But I would say the answer is still yes. One thing I realized while working on this project is the formula that underpins all modern search technology, a calculation or a formula called TF-IDF, is really just an approximation of topicality. And it's a pretty crude approximation at that. The TF-IDF formula says that if a term occurs a lot in one document, but not a lot across the documents in a corpus, then that term is considered important to that document. One might say it is a topic of that document. But we can do so much better by applying linguistic and semantic relationships to the content of that document. So for ASHE, I actually did use the TF-IDF score, but by improving it with semantic knowledge, we see that high-scoring terms produced by the tool, or high-scoring concepts, actually start to converge with what we would normally consider topicality. Just an overview of how we did this. We downloaded 50 digitized books from the Internet Archive. These were all biomedical texts. And we developed and ran the ASHE tool across those titles. And then we compared the headings produced by ASHE to those produced by a human cataloger. And for this, Peter Rolla manually recataloged these 50 titles so that we knew an expert did everything correctly, and he would be our gold standard for comparison to know how well the tool was able to compare to a person. A little bit about the tool itself. It is a Java application with a number of custom components. It uses OpenNLP, a Java package for core natural language processing tasks. The NLM lexical tools allows us to do various linguistic transformations that we use for comparing strings to find matches. And the UMLS database is a metathesaurus of a wide set of biomedical ontologies that are all brought together and linked together so that for us, this provides a really terrific source of synonymy where multiple terms will link to the same concept. So a very common example that we use is cancer can be expressed in medicine, tumors, neoplasm, neoplasia. There are all sorts of ways you can express biomedical concepts that ultimately mean the same thing. So the basic process we had was we would walk through each noun phrase in a given text. So a noun phrase is like the black cat. Or congestive obstructive pulmonary disease. That's really important because when you're dealing with complex jargon in any academic field, you're talking about multi-term phrases, and keyword searches often fail there if there's not something more sophisticated. So for each of those noun phrases, we walked through the UMLS to find a match. And then we were able to use the UMLS to make a connection to mesh. So if there wasn't a direct connection, we were able to follow the relationships and find the next best match to the actual subject heading. So now having a list of normalized biomedical concepts, we are able to apply the calculation that all search technology uses to determine relevancy. And the big difference here is we're doing this to concepts, not to terms. So we've extracted all of the concepts from a document, and now we're able to say, okay, what are the really important concepts in that document? And then it's really arbitrary at that point. Do we say, okay, the top 1, 2, 3, 5, are we going to say those highest ranking concepts are the subject heading? This is just an example of why we need something like natural language processing tools. If I were to say, if I were to be given this body of text and asked to extract all of the biomedical concepts in there, it's really hard. Without any linguistic knowledge, I have to chop this text up in a million different ways for all the different possible permutations, and then I have to run lookups for all of those different permutations. It becomes computationally impractical pretty fast, especially over large bodies of text. However, if I have linguistic knowledge that I can apply, then it's very easy to start parsing through and identifying the noun phrases that I then want to see, okay, now is this a linguistic, or is this a biomedical concept? It provides me a quick linear list that I can walk through. Okay, so how did we do? So this is the example of the output for one biomedical text that we processed. The title is Auscultation and Percussion. And on the right side are what we have labeled the correct headings, are the headings produced by Peter. He, as you would expect, chose percussion and auscultation. On the left are the headings, the top 10 or so headings produced by the tool, along with various scores associated with them. For this, we developed for evaluating the performance of the tool, we developed our own custom ranking algorithm. Accuracy measures are typical, but in this case, there's really no such thing as a wrong answer. It's really how high on the list did the right answer occur. So that's why we came up with our own scoring mechanism. So basically, we provided points to how high the correct term showed up in the list, looking at only the top 10. And that is ultimately our score. So down at the bottom, we see a score of 70% for this document, because it did find the right terms, but they weren't quite at the top. Across the 50 documents that we ran this on, about 20% scored very highly in the 76 to 100% range. So it found the right headings very close to the top. Another 30% fell somewhere in the middle, and then half the documents fell much lower. But remember, we are looking at only the top 10 headings produced by the tool out of thousands. So interpreting these results, things are actually extremely positive. The correct headings across the board were consistently found in the top 10 results produced by the tool. The calculation used for relevance ranking here to determine what is and is not most important relies heavily on the existence of a very large corpus. So that TF calculation, TF-IDF calculation, it runs under the expectation that you have hundreds or thousands or millions of documents. So getting good scoring with 50 documents was actually amazing. What threw things off were you would have a document that had a very unique concept in there, like potato. You know, that was ranked very highly because it was the only one amongst 50 that happened to mention potato. So there were some silly things like that we know would just fall by the wayside once we started adding more documents. Another great thing about the results is ASHE only uses the raw text, so it doesn't provide any special handling for the title or the table of contents. We could easily see a big change in the output by providing a weighting or a boosting for terms and concepts found in the title or concepts. So these are some of the practical things that we could do to make the tool work even better. But our goal was really to demonstrate the power of the raw text itself. So this tool is not under active development, but there are so many promising opportunities for it. One of the great things that came out of discussions of this tool was the realization, and one of our reference librarians pointed this out, across the board, the top headings produced, while the top 1 or 2 weren't always in the top spot, they were all really good and really relevant to the work. So if we think about the subject headings that are applied today, it's really kind of anachronistic that we have 1 or 2 subject headings. It comes from a time where there was limited space in card catalogs. But in a digital world where we can provide much more subject headings, that go into a relevance algorithm that then powers discovery tools like the catalog, something like this can add tremendous value to improve discovery. So we'd really like to do this in production by integrating with Hollis at some point. Right now it relies on biomedical ontologies, and we would really like to improve biomedical literature and discovery in that domain, but we want to expand elsewhere. So really the technique is generalizable, except it does rely on a thesaurus, a very robust thesaurus for biomedical information, and we need something comparable in law, art, business design, etc. Or we need to investigate methods that allow us to match and normalize concepts without the use of a thesaurus. So that's the tool. Talking a little bit more about what this means for doing other projects. The main challenge with this project was really access. And I think we've heard plenty about that challenge here. You can't, all of the publishers do things extremely differently. So even if the licensing issue wasn't there, determining the technical mechanism for harvesting the data from 100 or 1,000 different publishers, it's an actually incredibly large burden to have. And I would like to see libraries take a much more proactive role in creating platforms that actually facilitate that for research. There are so many opportunities in text mining. So as we move towards linked data, there's a big strings to things problem where we need to resolve the plain strings that are in the MARC catalog and relate them to authoritative records. There's a longstanding interest at our Center for the History of Medicine to discover historical terms that would allow us to would allow researchers to discover materials that are medical materials that are not discoverable today because they simply use different terms that are not known in modern practice. We could discover we could get more specific and discover what constituted the study of, say, nutrition in 1920. What are those sub-concepts and sub-concepts that actually make up that study? We could map growing topic areas. We could develop more with semantic search. We could develop knowledge bases, which is particularly keen in the medical space, where we want to know, is there a paper published that talks about a protein and a disease and a treatment and gene expression. These connections might all exist in the literature disparately, but if we can mine the literature and we can bring that sort of thing together, and actually develop or discover new avenues of research. And so again, I would really like to see the library building platforms to make these kinds of things possible, because there is so much. This is really just a list of what's available kind of related to the library space. But outside of the library, if we can have a great opportunity to facilitate people who want to do more work in their specific field. I think we're doing questions at the end.
Hello, I'm Christina Linklater. I catalog music at Houghton Library, Harvard's main rare books and manuscripts repository. Is this on?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Jean Bauer, I just wanted to let you know that as a matter of course, Houghton catalogers do trace place of publication, so we do have that that synthetic searching available. I wanted to ask a general question for the panel, just to get things rolling. There's a tradition in musicology, which is the field with which I am most familiar, of synthetic research. And in fact, there's a course being taught at MIT right now about computational methods that have been used by musicologists throughout the 20th century, from the very beginning of computation, really. Knowing how many antiphons came out of Benevento in the 12th century is something that musicologists have always tried to figure out. And as Anne Blair demonstrated in her book, Too Much to Know, even in the Middle Ages themselves, people were trying to sort of tot things up and figure out how much of things there were. How are you inspired by scholarship? How do you sort of have a sense for what scholars would like to know? You yourselves are scholars. How do you get a sense for what sorts of methods and practices and data output scholars would want?
I have a practical answer for that. In the first text mining project that I was involved with at Illinois, we looked at the kinds of questions that text mining tools could answer. So they can answer questions about categorization, for example. And then we systematically mined the critical literature from like American literary history and other journals to see where scholars were asking and answering questions that fell into categories that we had methods that could serve those categories. And not everything that they're doing is tractable to computational methods, but certainly there are many kinds of questions that scholars ask that could be addressed with these methods, and there are many assertions that scholars make that could be tested with these methods, and that I think is sort of the phase that we're at least in literary scholarship now. We can test empirical assertions that have always been empirical, but haven't always been testable.
I would say that from a software side, my mode of operation is usually to inspire new questions, not necessarily knowing. So taking what we can do, developing prototypes and answering certain questions, and showing off the technology so that you generate interest and you inspire people to kind of ask new questions that are related to their field. I think there is enough being done right now that the non-computational fields just need to catch up. We need to develop tools that are then applicable and usable by other scholars to ask their more discrete questions, because we're not going to ask every question that can be asked with the tools that we have.
I mean, I think talking to people is the crucial component. You need to ask. And, so sometimes and you can spark interest in lots of ways. Panels like this one showing what's possible. You never know what will sort of light up in someone's brain, but also focus groups. This isn't a data mining issue, but when I was building prosopography databases as a graduate student at the University of Virginia, the first part of my design process was to go around and talk to as many people as I could buy coffee from and show them my diagrams and explain to them how I was going to be recording the information and what kind of searching I thought was going to be possible. And I found out all kinds of useful things. Like someone was like, oh, you're going to keep track of organizations. Please keep track of which of them actually have a publication history. I study the American Tract Society. I really want to know about publishing. And so, there's no, you can get at some of this through surveys, you can get at some of this through larger communities, but honestly, the subject liaisons in the library who have the close relationship with the faculty, with the students, there's no substitution for sitting down and talking to people. And yeah, it doesn't scale spectacularly well, but on the other hand, if you talk to certain number of people and you hear the same, if talk to 10 people and 6 people among their various comments all raise one thing, you probably got a good idea that might be something worth pursuing, and go back and talk to them when you're when you're done. But I haven't seen a silver bullet. It's research consultations over and over and over again. But bring something to the table to spark the conversation.
You can go. Oh, somebody else. Oh. I'm fascinated by the consumptive, non-consumptive concept, which has been sort of floating around certainly since we began the Google project. I'm wondering your opinions about whether that distinction is a short-term way of thinking about information or content. It just seems to me that as I get more kind of confused, excited, threatened by what's coming down the pike in terms of what the library role is, what does it mean to collect information, what does it mean to organize it and make it available in lots of different ways, not just consumptive ways, which is what we're used to doing. Do we think that kind of distinction between what now, the way Kyle kind of elaborated on it as being the difference between consumptive and non-consumptive uses of information, is that really just a short-term thing? Because, within some short period of time, it's all going to be consumption. That is, you consume it in lots of different ways. But that we're making this sort of arbitrary distinction because of the point in time we are at and because of the way that we collect and make information available. Sorry, that was just a kind of crazy question.
So you're saying when non-consumptiveness becomes the norm, like that's what you're saying. So, I mean, it's almost there. I mean, because the text mining alone, maybe because the law discipline's particularly spoiled because case law is supposed to be in the public domain. You're supposed to be able to search it and text mine it. And, we have large databases like Lexis and Westlaw we can use. We can search words across, hundreds of years of case law instantly, but other fields haven't had that yet. So we may be using stuff in the law for different than the result of the case or what the law is about. But I like to think that the ability for non-consumptive research makes more paths for interdisciplinary research, which we haven't seen yet. And that's where I think the non-consumptive nature will turn into, hey, this is how we use information. We don't have to call it consumptive or non-consumptive anymore. We can say interdisciplinary research studies involves text and data mining. That's just my initial thoughts. I don't know.
I kind of think that non-consumptive is shorthand for one of the criteria for fair use, which is not competing with somebody else's economic interest. And if you think of it that way, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. And there will be lots of uses where that distinction isn't relevant. I'm not, by reading and understanding a book, I'm not competing with someone's economic interest. But by republishing the text, I am. So,
just to take a crazier turn, John, you made the you made the distinction between understanding and not understanding, partially in jest. But as we develop higher levels of semantic technology, that you do have an autonomous agent that can interact with the data and with the person in a way that seems to understand the data, such as question answering systems. If I pipe a bunch of biomedical literature through that system and I'm able to extract or answer questions about that literature, how am I now back to a consumptive use of that literature, which I may not have licensed, being a user of the end product?
One thing I do find interesting about the distinction between consumptive and non-consumptive is the way that when you place constraints on a system, you often find new solutions, new ways to use it. So the idea of, okay, I need to get out information from this collection of works that could not be reconstituted back into the work itself. Okay, so what does that leave me? And it actually leaves you with a whole lot of things that you might not initially have considered looking at that work. Like, I'm going to make a list of all some of the grammatical structures. I mean, it might have occurred to people, but it also is a chance to really kind of push yourself to think, what are in these texts aside from linking them together into republishable systems. And I think that actually can free free you to think about it in different ways. So it would be nice if there were fewer restrictions, of course, but that is something like a silver lining.
All right, time for one more question, maybe?
Thanks a lot. This is for John. I really liked your idea of talking to publishers and the balance of power between publishers and users, readers. Let's say an enlightened publisher is one who recognizes that it's in the publisher's interest to put its corpus into a mineable platform like the HathiResearch platform. How many enlightened publishers are there? And when you talk to them, are you able to enlighten them? And can you list and publicly thank the enlightened ones? Can you get the enlightened ones to publish testimonies saying, this has not hurt our business at all. In fact, it's enhanced it, and we measure that through downloads and traffic.
Yeah. So the conversations, for example, with ProQuest, while not conclusive so far, have not been difficult. They do see their business shifting in this direction. They do recognize the limitations that are inherent in their own content and its boundaries. And so I think they're open to this. What I would like to do is get some first examples of a few different kinds of publishers. So ProQuest is one kind of publisher, the commercial publisher that publishes into an academic space. I'd love to get the Modern Language Association or the American Psychological Association or one of the large scholarly societies that also functions as a publisher to take this same deal and then begin to think about what other categories of publishers might we go after, because I do think examples will be compelling and actually maybe even will spark the competitive juices of others in that category if they think somebody's getting a jump on them.